I am wonderful.
This meeting is being recorded.
Oh,
There he is.
There.
So wonderful to see you in person.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
And very glad that you're alive, considering the work that you're doing.
I am too. I'm 66 today, actually. Just turned, it's my birthday. So
Happy birthday to Kevin and Annette. Right on. What an honor this is. So just a little background. I read the Common Law Handbook earlier this summer and was really blown away by what a small book it was, but yet it was loaded with pertinent information. And then I knew I wanted to interview you at some point in some venue, but it was with a discussion with a friend of mine on the Facebook podcast or internet podcast, Third Eye Salon. And I spread the news of the warrants from January 15th, or the decision from January 15th, and the warrants, I think they came a few days later, and that what kind of impact that had. And it sparked a real conversation about the validity of law and what constitutes the validity of law. And I realized, maybe to a greater degree than I had before, that people really don't understand what is the basis of law, what gives the law power. That's really the people, that the history of this. And so I think that's playing into this whole idea of disbelief that maybe back in 2013, the efforts of the International Common Law Court of Justice had an influence on the Pope resigning. That's a huge one.
Way, yeah.
So
in a big way. Yeah.
So before we get to the really good, juicy stuff about what's going on now, can you just give us a little bit of background on where common law started, how it came through history, and maybe how the art of war plays into that and your thinking, and to set a stage for what we're going to be talking about that's currently happening?
Sure. Common law came out of England over 1,000 years ago, but it's also understood in many cultures as being the law of nature, the law born in us. The ways that people live together and establish their own law so they can live in peace and justice and, operate as normal human beings, do with each other, keep the peace, but also keep justice among each other. Now, of course, there's two realities of law, just like there is in life. There's the things that people do among and for themselves. And then there's when a few want to dominate the many, they set up their own rules of how to behave. They set up their own religions, their own government, to try to pound in everybody's head that you don't know what's best for you. We know what's best for you. And so, for example, the last place you want to learn about law is to go to law school or to talk to lawyers, just because they have a vested interest in saying, we're the professionals, we know best, everything else is wrong, right? Because that's their bread and butter, right? But in a nutshell, there's stream within Europe that led to the common law. It really came out of tribal law in Northern Europe that said that people are born equal. They establish their own governance among themselves. They can withdraw from that at any point. I mean, there's a classic scene, and I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Dances with Wolves. It was, yeah, well, okay. So there's the Lakota warriors are sitting around talking about whether they should go to war against the U.S. cavalry. And one of the elders says, well, no man can tell another what to do, right? And each warrior had to decide for themselves, am I going to go to war or not? And they could sit back and not take part. You see, that's a very basic common law idea. There is no authority over us unless we consent. You don't consent with a gun to your head saying, you agree, don't you, right? Which is an old notion of consent in our culture, because everything in our society, really what's now a global corporatocracy, is based on the idea that you don't have the right to say no. You just go along with orders from some arbitrary person who you never elected, who just says we have authority over you, right? And so there's two different notions of law, because out of common law, there's that notion that came out of Europe, really. Hold on, I've lost contact with you. Can you still see?
I can still hear you. Something happened to my camera. Can you still hear me?
I can hear you, but you disappeared from the screen. So
yeah, I'm trying to work that out right now, but I can totally hear you. We're recording, so you're the main focus anyway. They don't need to see me, so go ahead.
Okay, no, that's good. I just want to make sure I wasn't talking to nobody. There was that first tradition of common law where the people, the tribal notion, where the people govern themselves. And the other stream came out of Rome. It's the old kind of, it came out of Roman property law, where people are not born with inherent identity or rights. They're given those rights and identity by a ruler. So, people probably know there's a lot being written about the capitalized letters on government ID, which was a Roman designation. It was called in Latin uh, capitis diminutia maxima, which means the maximum diminishing of head or authority. It was given to a slave to say you're a property of somebody else and you can be disposed of and killed and whatever, whenever they like. That's the legal definition of anyone in modern society. When you register at birth and that, they see you as property to be manipulated, and they can take away the privileged rights they give you whenever they like, as you can see with this whole COVID police state happening now. So in that Roman notion, there's only a few people who have rights. Everybody else are slaves. In common law, we're all inherent. It's like the American Declaration of Independence. There are no sovereigns. It's like John Adams said, and one of the founding fathers. He said, America is the first nation in history with no sovereigns except the people. We have no kings or popes over us. We are subject only to law that we are ourselves established on our own conscience. It's very simple, but none of us are ever taught that, because we're raised in a very dependent slave type of society. So anyway, that's kind of in a nutshell the source of it. And when people say, like, when you issue a warrants in that, does the court have any standing? Yes, absolutely. People can form not only their own governance, but their own courts and investigative tribunals when the regular courts aren't doing it or are complicit in the crime, as is very much the case, with the history of genocide we've documented and all of that. So yeah, we have inherent authority coming from we the people, right?
So what's fascinating to me in my own study of the law, and before my camera conveniently just went out, you can see in the background, I've produced a law DVD where I have had to issue with traffic tickets my whole life. Seems like the police have been, and I'm in California, the police have been focusing on me for every little thing I do. And then when I realized that, going back to the Magna Carta, you're talking about the officers of the crown cannot make pleas of the crown because that's a conflict of interest, or some, I don't know if that's a direct quote, but that's paraphrasing. And so when you have a police officer at your window, they're actually working for the state, they're collecting money for the state, and they're the witness to the alleged crime. And so it unfolded for me this whole big picture of the courts are full of conflicts of interest and due process violations. The whole traffic ticket process really was an entryway for me to see this across the board. And so what's fascinating for me is when you're describing this Roman law coming in, at some point, it meets up with common law and there's a merger of some sorts. But it seems like the statutes and codes kind of overtook the common law, and people don't really realize that the statutes and codes are what I learned as rebuttable or prima facie, but it's really the common law that has the traction. When did the statutes and codes come in? How did they get that past us?
Well, statute is simply a rule that the government or any power brings in to maintain themselves. Usually it's to get money or to control their population in some way. But it's a long precedent in common law, right up to the US Supreme Court. Oliver Wendell Holmes, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, said in the 1920s, statute without consent is not law. Okay, so they can bring in whatever statute they like. If you are not harming anyone and you don't consent, it has no authority over you, unless you enter into their contract, which you do when you sign the ticket. When they hand you a ticket and they compel you under force to sign it, well, it's an invalid contractual relationship because you're doing it under duress. And that's all you do. You write your name. If you feel they need to sign it, you just write under duress under your signature, and it's invalid in court. So at least if they're operating according to the rule of law, which these days a lot of courts don't. So how it got in, it's just, rulers, in quotes, have a vested interest in statute, not in common law. And they, to give you an example, traditionally in England, the sheriff was the local appointee of the shire or the village communities. Right. And they would allow every man in the village to help enforce the law, to help protect the community. Well, the king came in and appointed the sheriff as his tax collector. So they subvert that and make it an arm of the state, like they've done with churches, with, everything. Anything independent is sucked up by this kind of Moloch state. And then they subvert the language. So now, people have lost the original meaning of it, but police have no authority to do anything. Really. You ask for their oath of office, you ask for the contract you're in with them, and they can't answer that because they're never schooled in the law. So, you can then walk away. I mean, it's pretty simple, right?
Yeah, and in my past, I've subpoenaed oaths of office in traffic cases. And what we found is they all have oaths of office, but they're not the oath of office that's word for word that they're supposed to take, the constitutional oath of office, or even from the government code.
Right.
And so to me, that seems like a plausible deniability avenue where they could say, well, we didn't take that real oath. We took this other oath.
Well, they only can do that because there's no more government or rule of law. There's just corporate relationships. And so they're working for a corporation. And here's our advantage. Because everything is now corporatized, if you don't have a contract with a corporation, they have no authority over you. They don't have any natural authority over you all because a corporation is a fiction. You only have to answer anybody in the system by first saying, show me the contract we have. Because if it was a natural relationship, they wouldn't have to show a contract. You would have said, okay, I consent to be within your authority until I want to withdraw. And then that's fine. That's non-contractual common law relationship, right? But the minute they start talking about statute and here's our authority, and it's obvious that they're a corporation, they have no authority over you because show me the contract, right? That I willingly entered into, right? They can't.
They absolutely cannot. And your book, the Common Law Training Manual, is riddled with references really to magic, because you're occult magic, because you're talking about manifesting the desired outcome. You're talking about the art of war, which is really the ritually based attitude to view war, and the different moves that have been planned out over time are really the same moves that we all have to deal with now. There's no difference in the situations. How do you view this at all from an occult magical standpoint? I mean, people talk about the Vatican is riddled with pedophilia. I know in preparation for this interview and in the Common Law Training Manual book, it talks about the desecration that happened to the children in Canada, especially the Native American children. My information is that they're using these children not just to physically debase them for their own satisfactions or for greed, but there's something more going on behind this. What's your take on that?
Well, it's at many levels. It's definite energy vampirism, and I've been directly involved in observing that as a clergyman, and then after I was involved in exorcisms, where you see these realities up close. And it's partly that. It's also a big money-sucking operation. To get people's lands and resources and everything, you've got to destroy the next generation. So it was simple money that was prompting that. But in terms of the occult aspect, it's riddled, and it's all about language, words, right?
Right.
The word you just used, pedophilia, it means the friend of children, right? Philia is like Philadelphia, the city of love. There's 3 words in Greek for love: philia, eros, and agape. Agape being the kind Jesus always talks about, the divine love. Philia is friendship. Eros is romantic. Okay, so every time people use the word pedophilia, they're reinforcing the idea that these people are really friends of children, you see, not child killers. We just use a language that speaks directly to the reality, not what we've been given, because what we've been given subverts our minds to make us think that it's good when it's bad, that it's beneficial rather than harmful, right? So, it's a matter of unlearning the language first. Another one, apology. Here governments, whenever their crimes are exposed, they start saying, we're going to issue an apology. They never say, I'm going to apologize, but they use the word apology, which in the English language does not mean you're sorry. It means I defend what I did. It's a defense of one's action, an apologetic. So unconsciously they're saying to people, we didn't do anything wrong. We're not sorry. We don't have to pay. But you can think I'm sorry now. You see, it's a double meaning. They've got their one agenda. Everyone else is thinking something else. It's how you keep the slave population in the box, thinking, oh, good, they're being nice to us now, right?
Sounds just like a Jordan Maxwell lecture. I don't know if you've ever heard of Jordan Maxwell, but he's somebody that I've studied with pretty heavily.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you're obviously well versed in a lot of areas, and that's what I think is most impressive about you, because it really takes that kind of a well-rounded education to be able to see this from the standpoint that needs to be taken to take action, to know that you can take action in the face of high scrutiny and opposition from people that really have love in their hearts, but they don't understand really the backdrop to all this. And so coming back to sheriffs, you made a point earlier. There's a sheriff in Sutter County here in California. His name is Brandon Barnes, and he's working with this church, the Church of Glad Tidings in Yuba City. And the church has its own militia, and the sheriff backs it. I don't think there's another county in California that has their own militia. So when General Michael Flynn spoke at the church last summer, I rolled up into the parking lot, and there's guys decked out in full military gear with their AR-15s or M16s. I don't know what kind of rifles they were, but I mean, they looked like they were military. The sheriff was in attendance. Yet still, this sheriff, although very enlightening compared to sheriffs in California, this sheriff still allows the conflict of interest in the court on the multiple levels, the due process violations, and for the local police, the policy enforcers, to pull people over outside the Constitution in violation of their oaths. What would you suggest to do or to say to these sheriffs? And we don't want to ruin how far they've come. Brandon Barnes is really a nice guy. I've met him, but they're still connected to the Fed. They're still taking funds from the Fed or something. How do we stop these corrupt courts on the lower end and continue that ball moving forward in our direction?
Well, you need two things. You see, they all operate according to chain of command, and they have to refer to the existing one if there's nothing else in place. And ultimately, the second factor is that of jurisdiction. Like, where ultimately the common law courts derive their authority from a republic. Okay. Now, in America, the republic's being subverted, but the basis of it, the spirit of it, is in its root. A place like Canada, there never was a republic. We tried to have a revolution and got destroyed in 1837, defeated. The power of the crown was solidified, and which allowed it to do a lot of this genocide with the churches. But the point is that the jurisdiction of a court arises ultimately from the nation in which it operates. Okay. So what you need to say to the sheriffs is, okay, we need to restore the foundation of the American Republic, which lies in the Constitution, and the ability of the people to act on it as the ultimate law, right? Okay. So, like, we had an example of this in South Dakota about 6 years ago now. I worked with a group of farmers who were all losing their land because corrupt judges were getting in collusion with the mortgage companies, issuing fraudulent eviction orders. So they went to the federal marshal in Minneapolis, and he was ready to arrest this judge, but he said, I don't have a protocol because everything's political. That, Washington's going to intervene. In fact, they did. The attorney general came in and started arresting all these people on the grounds that they were issuing fraudulent government stamps. They appointed their own attorney general. These farmers were like taking back they had a movement called Restore the Republic. They were just trying to act on that. But the what is now the so-called political authority moved in and stomped it. So we have to create a political basis of everything we do and create new chains of command. We have in a way a clear job in Canada because it never existed. We're creating it through the Republic of Canada. We're telling to the police, you got to renounce your oath of allegiance to Queen Elizabeth and her descendants, right, and take it to the Republican Constitution. But in America, it's fuzzier because people think you already have it, right? And that's a real challenge to know, how are you going to restore the Republic when people's minds think, in it, right? Right.
So I think you're referring to Tim Turner. Is that who, and the Restore the Republic movement that was here in the United States? Is that correct?
At least the aspect that was in the Midwest, because I don't know if they're connected to him or not, but they were calling themselves that. This was a group of farmers in Minnesota and South Dakota who were fighting this, you know.
Yeah.
And
So
a bunch of them they're still in jail in Duluth. They gave them like 20 years.
wow.
Political prisoners. Yeah.
For just, yeah. And so that's real scary to a lot of people. And, like referring to the Art of War, Tim Turner apparently was trying to restore the Republic in the United States by reseating all the offices. And in classic fashion, they just cut the head off the snake. And I'm pretty sure last time I checked, at least Tim Turner's still in jail, kind of like the people that you're describing about. So this movement has got histories of trying to take back over. But yet you just described and hit the nail on the head. The people that are working for the current establishment does not think that it is lawful to go with the common law, or they're afraid of losing. I mean, they got families, right? They got wives, they got husbands, they got kids, they have mortgages. That's a whole nother scam right there. But breaking through that, is it going to take, God forbid, is it going to take bloodshed, or can we do this peacefully?
Well, it's your ancestors in the 18th century had the same issue, right? They tried many times to get
revolution, right? It seems cyclic revolution. So I mean, is it coming back around?
Thomas Jefferson said you need a revolution every generation, every 25 years. He said that's the only way the republic will stay alive, is if you revolt against the authorities every 25 years. So, I mean, you have the right to revolution. It goes back to England and Scotland, saying that, the famous saying of John Knox, the Protestant reformer in Scotland, said, resistance to tyranny is obedience to God, because God doesn't create any authority over people except God, right? And when a tyrant gets in the way of God and the people, that's blasphemy. That isn't just tyranny, that's against the natural order. And you then have a right to overthrow that. And that goes back to Magna Carta. The right of revolution says you have the right to overthrow any system of government that's become tyranny, that's not responsive, that has its own rules, it's not accountable to the people, and operates through, coercion and not consent. So that's just inherent in America, right?
Okay, a quick question off topic before we get to the current events. Is poverty seems to be increasing all around our country, at least. I'm guessing in Canada as well. Abandoned buildings everywhere. Is there a common law way to take say abandoned church or an abandoned school? Is there a common law way to take possession of that you know of?
Yeah, we've done in Canada. Because ultimately what is ownership, show a title, a deed to the building, but ultimately what's that based on? It's based on who owns the land. And who does own the land? Well, God owns the land. Creation. God has given the earth to the people, not to one particular group.
Right.
So like in property law, they call it a allodial title.
Right.
And a allodial title is inherent if you live in a place more than 2 generations. I think that's European tradition.
Okay.
If a farmer's been on that land for that long, it's his, under God, but and that's inherent title. So you ask the people who built that church or community center, where's the ultimate title? Who did you get it from originally? Okay, in many cases in America, like in Canada, it's the native people. So we go to the indigenous people and we say, look, excuse me, we want to be in union and partnership with you. Okay. We want to step back from this genocidal tradition. We want to establish a new deal here on the land where we share the land. They share their own. And native people have been evicting the crown authorities and these churches from their land for many years, thanks partly to our work. But we issue new title deeds. Okay. And we can, as long as if these are publicly funded buildings like churches are, they're taxpayer, tax exempt, publicly owned buildings. We have every right to peacefully occupy them and use them for our own purposes. Right.
Right. Are you familiar with the Lavoy Finicum and Ammon Bundy case in Southern Oregon a few years back?
No.
The documentary American Standoff. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so just real briefly, they took over a federal ranger station in Southern Oregon, and they were labeled as terrorists and all this. Really, they were just defending their own tradition of homesteading the land in which the federal government was encroaching upon. So there's stuff like that goes on. Definitely for the future, whenever there's time, American Standoff would be a really good documentary for you. Not that you need any extra education. I can tell you're real.
No. I can always learn from each other, because the best learning comes from our own experiences, our own actions, right? So that's good to know. Thank you.
Okay. So let's get to some of the juicy stuff today. So January 15th, the Common Law Court of Justice issued another series of judgments. Queen Elizabeth, Xing, or however you pronounce his name, from China, the head of China, Justin Trudeau, some CEOs of Pfizer and some other companies. Well, my first question was, even understanding where you're coming from, is how are they going to arrest the guy in China? How are they going to arrest Queen Elizabeth, right? How are they going to arrest Trudeau? Well, I don't know how it's going to happen with China, but I think we've already seen some pressure applied in England, which is behind the lifting of the restrictions. Is that true?
Well, don't forget, it wasn't just arrest warrants. It was also giving people a warrant to seize the COVID drug, because it's a drug that was created through medical genocide, medical experimentation, drug testing on children who died. All the big pharma companies do it, just like they work with China and organ trafficking as we speak. And so these are banned unlawful drugs, and anyone now with a warrant, which has universal jurisdiction, anyone can seize these drugs and shut down pharmacies like they've done in England, the south of France. They got the workers not to go into work because they could face arrest. I mean, it's really beginning to spread. But the thing about the arrest of individuals, because that's often what people like, they want to see these guys taken off in manacles, very satisfying.
Love that.
Okay, but the word arrest comes from the French word arrête, which means to stop. Okay. So to stop people, you don't have to physically take them off to a jail. Okay. Classic case was Pope Benedict, Joseph Ratzinger, is still locked up in the Vatican. This is the 9th year since his conviction by our common law court. He hasn't left because he knows that any court can issue an arrest warrant against him based on his lawful conviction by our common law court. They know that. That's why, and Elizabeth Windsor vanished from sight. Emma Walmsley, the head of GlaxoSmithKline, she vanished. The British government canceled their next COVID measures the very day our sheriffs showed up in England with the arrest warrants, because they don't want thousands of protesters armed with these arrest warrants, because then it isn't just mere protest anymore. They're all sheriffs. They're common law sheriffs who can not just arrest these people, but seize the assets and properties of their corporations. I mean, Pfizer, GlaxoSmithKline, Roche, Novartis, all these companies now are transnational criminal organizations under the law. They forfeited their right to do commerce, to sell their products. The people of the world can now just shut them down. This is revolutionary, and yet people don't. The big stumbling block isn't the cop out there; it's the cop in your head saying you can't do this. We don't have the power or the right to do this. That's the biggest
fear
problem.
Seems to be a big one. Fear, right? I mean, I don't want to go to jail, and I know when I don't drive with the driver's license, and I haven't had one since 2015. Up until that point, I was afraid to not have a driver's license because I would go to jail, right? And so that seems to work on a wide level. Okay, so let's quickly talk about the convoy in Canada. I listened to you with one of your colleagues in England, I think it was Owen, somebody, excuse me. And you were mentioning that because the convoy, which from the outside looks like it's this great, maybe mass movement, maybe some type of a common law movement to get the government to drop the restrictions in Canada, but they're getting funded by some curious people now. So does that invalidate the movement, or are the elites just trying to usurp the movement now?
It's like with anything, you ask two questions. When something appears out of nowhere like that, boom, thousands of people, it's not natural, because I know, having worked my whole life on these movements, it takes years. It takes a lot of hard work, and when the system is against you, to build something like that. So where did this come from? Always ask two questions. Who organized it? Who funds it? If they can't provide that information, which should be open public knowledge, then you got to ask where it's coming from. On the other hand, there are a lot of ordinary people involved in it who are great. They are saying things like, for example, in the middle of Canada in Western Ontario, in this one town, some of our people went in with the arrest warrants to say to these truckers, look, arrest the bastard when you get to Ottawa. And the warrants were already there. People were already looking at it. And they're all saying, yeah, we should shut down this whole thing, shut down the whole COVID thing, because, you know, we've got to do it. They knew instinctively they had to do more than just drive around honking their horns, right? But the people controlling it are very much being influenced, for one thing, by one of the holding companies of all big pharma. There's two investment companies, BlackRock and Vanguard Group.
Very good.
And they have assets of $18 trillion. I mean, these guys run big pharma. And they also own a big chunk of the North American trucking industry, right? And not just in North America, but there's now truck convoys in 17 countries. Well, that costs billions of dollars to organize. Who has the money to arrange that? Obviously, this is kind of just, you know, not a spontaneous movement. It was directed, but it get out of their hands, right? It can start as one thing, but the people can turn it in another direction.
Sure.
And I see that beginning to happen, right?
Okay. So did Trudeau flee because of that? Supposedly he bailed.
What he did was he went out to the West Coast, which is where his base of support is. He's owned and operated by the Chinese government.
Right.
And there's lots of evidence about that. And we have made 3 arrests on the West Coast. I forgot to mention that when you asked about arrests. 3 of the lower level people named in the indictment, I don't want to say who, but they've not only beginning to name others, but they're pointing to several mass grave sites on Vancouver Island where people killed as recently as 2019 are buried. These people, mostly natives, are in drug testing, or the children are taken. It's a group called the 12 Mile Club. They take children outside the 12-mile territorial limit, use them in snuff films, kill them, dump them overboard. We have insiders describing this to us. So they're taking us to some of these grave sites. So this whole thing is blowing up. And Trudeau was avoiding the being there because he's so implicated with the Chinese. He can't, obviously he was told to get out of town for a while by his handlers because, you know, they can't have this thing open up. And, you know, besides, he's not the head of state in Canada. The Governor General is. Trudeau's just the hired help. You know, Prime Minister means First Minister of the Queen. He's just an employee. The Governor General is the head of state in Canada, can do away with the government tomorrow. You know, it's that old colonial system still in place. So why aren't the truckers mentioning Mary Simon, the Governor General? Never even talk about her. So that's questionable right there, right?
Okay. You know, I'd love to see that happen in the United States. I'm pretty sure Joe Biden's in the pockets of, or China's in the pockets of Joe Biden as well.
Well, you notice, Well, you notice what he did a couple of months ago, another act of treason. He went to Rome and he was buddying with the Pope, even though the guy's he's a convicted criminal, Jorge Bergoglio. He's also named in the indictment. He gave personal sanction to the use of children in Catholic hospitals and orphanages for drug testing experiments. You know, so there he is fawning over the Pope. There goes separation of church and state right out the window. But the reason he did that is China, the Vatican Bank is taking most of their assets and giving it to China. They're shifting geopolitically to the east, and Biden's terrified of that. I mean, China's a rising power. They've made a new alliance with Russia,
Right.
And America's a declining. So, you know, these guys are all following the money, right?
Right. Follow the money. Okay, a couple of last quick questions. I really appreciate your time. We have some corruption in our county here. I'm not going to say what county that is because our beloved head of the law system, the DA, is known for mysterious deaths, kind of like the Clintons. So if you were to be provided, or if the International Common Law Court of Justice was provided with enough evidence, would they be able to issue warrants against the local lower level people here in my county here?
Yeah, with enough evidence, and if it was done through, you know, due process and you did a case on it, they can not only can the court in Europe do that, but they can authorize local common law courts to issue their own warrants and take action with their authorization. So that's the power. It doesn't all have to come from them. Local courts can enact the same thing.
Okay, that's very encouraging. I'm probably going to be back in touch with you just on that level. But
Sure.
okay, so two last questions. So you have all these health practitioners working with COVID, okay? I've done the evidence, done the research myself. I'm just about to publish an article in Phenomena magazine about how this church in Yuba City actually treats COVID as a spirit, and they rebuke it as a demon, and they don't have any cases, that no social distancing, and everyone wore masks. Again, Sheriff Brandon Barnes, who's very enlightened, does not close them down. They've been open the whole time. But yet you have these nurse practitioners, these say respiratory therapists, phlebotomists, a whole series of attendants that work under the doctors that are really just following orders. And so I keep seeing posts about the Nuremberg Code, where the Nuremberg Code, they held media people and health practitioners culpable for the crimes of the Nazi regime. Do you see that happening here in the United States and Canada, North America? Is that going to apply, or are those people going to be let go because they were really innocent, or they're just like the sheriffs, they're afraid they're going to lose their job or whatever?
It's no defense under the law that you're following orders. You can say, oh, I didn't know my father was hiding the murder weapon in the attic. Doesn't matter. You're complicit under the law. You're just as guilty as the person who pulled the trigger. The Nuremberg Convention and the Nuremberg laws in the late 1940s said that it is not a defense under the law to say you were following orders. You're still complicit in a crime. So frankly, every one of those people administering the COVID vaccine, the drug, the COVID drug, anyone administering it is guilty under the law of committing, aiding and abetting crimes against humanity now, since our verdict on January 15th. They all have to stand down from doing it, or they can be arrested. Okay, that's what it's got to be taught to people. And when we do teach it to people, they do stand down, like in the south of France, in Cornwall, England. We've shut down pharmacies. People have stopped going to work in these, injection centers because they know the consequences. It's a matter of teaching people now this law and acting on it, right?
Okay. Last question. Have you seen or heard news? You can get a bunch of this on the Real Raw News website about the supposed hangings or executions at Guantanamo Bay. Do you have any evidence, or have you seen any sources that look credible that support this? I mean, has Hillary Clinton really been hanged? Have some of these other people really been executed? Or is that just some kind of psyop going on?
Well, I can't say one way or the other because I haven't seen any hard evidence on it.
Right, me either. Right.
So, like, kind of gossip and hearsay and innuendo on the internet doesn't constitute evidence.
That's right.
Especially when you think of it, if she actually was, I think there'd be a much bigger political fallout, and people would be capitalizing on her opponents, and that would be spreading that around. But I mean, it's a question of show the evidence, hard evidence, right? And there's a difference between conjecture and fact, right? Under law.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. Just thought I'd throw that at you because I know you're well-rounded in your education. So as a journalist myself, I'm always trying to find corroboration for those kind of wild stories. So I figured I'd throw that one out there. Okay. So Kevin, we're going to cut this a little short. I know I could talk to you for hours. I know you're super busy. So thank you again for your time. I would like to schedule another interview at some point in the future when I have an external camera so I can keep my side going a little bit.
Sure.
We're going to get this up on Third Eye Salon. Probably let it go there for a couple of days. And then I have a few other internet television shows or radio shows that we could post this on. And I will keep you posted on that. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for your time. And I'll be in touch by email, okay?
Please do. Yeah, I've got a few things to share as well. So we'll talk again. Thank you so much.
Wonderful, Kevin. Have a great day.
You too.